Well, to talk more about that, I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Lauren.
And in Washington tonight, Behnam Taleblu is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Welcome to you. So, Behnam, you have written a piece in Atlantic about why the world should be taking Iran's threats more seriously, and you compare it to complacency over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Explain that a bit for us.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be with you, as well as with the ambassador, whose writings on this topic and many more I've been a fan of for many years. But in short, there is a tendency by analysts, activists, policymakers, and journalists to put words in the mouths of leaders who are adversaries and leaders who are allies and partners. And unfortunately, on the adversary side of the equation, there's a tendency to ignore the very plain and public things that these individuals have said, whether it's Putin, whether it's Khamenei, whether it's Khomeini, or if you want to go back in time, Bin Laden, or well before that, even Adolf Hitler, about their intentions, and then downsize or politically recast those intentions. So in the piece, I tried to thread together many years of the Islamic Republic's anti-Israel and anti-Semitic ideology, and then showed how they put their money where their mouth is, and why Washington, Jerusalem, and lots of other capitals should step up and have a proper Iran policy, which begins with listening to what these individuals are saying, watching what's being done, and preparing a proper counter.
Ambassador, do you agree with that? Does the U.S. downplay the threats from Iran for its own political ends?
I think there's actually a fundamental difference in interest. And let me explain. Between the United States, Israel, and Israel's allies now in the Middle East. America's a big country. Forgive me for saying the obvious. It's far away from the Middle East. It's not threatened with national annihilation by the Iranians. Israel is a small country. We're in Iran's backyard. We are threatened with national annihilations by the Iranians. So the President of the United States, and not only the current President, previous presidents have said that America is committed to preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. That's fine. But American presidents are not committing to preventing Iran from having the ability to make a nuclear weapon, what's known as the threshold capacity, which could take, a matter of weeks, even days, to break out and create a nuclear weapon. Now, for Israel, that's an intolerable situation. What does it mean? Hezbollah starts firing thousands of rockets at us. Hamas fires thousands of rockets at us. We have to respond. We have to respond by moving our army against these two terrorist entities. And Iran declares a nuclear alert, and our ability to defend ourselves basically implodes. And we had a very good example of how this works in the Ukraine, because no sooner had the Russians invaded Ukraine when Mr. Putin declared a nuclear alert. And the minute he declared a nuclear alert, no Western country significantly intervened in Ukraine. It was afraid. So it's the ultimate deterrent. So, America maybe can play down the threats, as Ben mentioned, by Khamenei and the other Ayatollahs. But at the end of the day, there's a really fundamental difference of interest between our two countries.
Behnam, do you agree with that? And do those comments by the senior Iranian official at the weekend change anything, do you think, for the Americans?
Well, I'd like to thread the needle a little bit differently. I mean, yes, national annihilation with a nuclear weapon based on missiles that can definitely strike Israel, that Iran already has. In fact, Iran already calls all of its medium-range ballistic missiles Israel-hitting missiles, and all of these missiles can, in fact, carry nuclear warheads. Those technical points aside, Iran is working towards longer-range strike capabilities that could first threaten Europe and potentially even one day, God forbid, threaten the U.S. mainland. What happens in the Middle East, however, those are threats to the U.S. national interest, and those are things that the Iranians are increasingly trying to do to, heighten the threat profile, to evict America from the region, to be able to export the revolution, and to be able to do things like what the ambassador was mentioning. And, sometimes the debates, the hyper-politicized rhetoric of the debate obscures the strategy. And the Iranian strategy is to basically get that nuclear umbrella so that it can continue to, through a death by 1,000 cuts, work towards that national annihilation strategy against Israel.
Well, President Biden, of course, was in the region last week, Ambassador, and he did say that America would use force to stop Iran from.
Yeah, I have some good sources that tell me that was off the record. That was off script. He didn't mean to say that. It's actually the first time he's ever said that this administration. Yes. Actually, the Obama administration used to say all the time that all the options are on the table, including the military option. This administration has fastidiously voided that construct.
But was that reassuring reassuring for the Israelis to know?
I don't think it was deeply reassuring. I think it was expressed also by Prime Minister Lapid that we have this difference of opinion. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And here, I'll just put a finer edge to things that Benjamin said, and that is that we, as the Jewish state with a historic memory that's not that old, have to take seriously when a country says they're going to wipe us off the map, when they have a genocidal policy. A former Iranian president described Israel as a one-bomb country. Now, there are people in Washington who said, well, the Israelis probably have a bomb. Let the Iranians have a bomb. We'll have mutually assured destruction like we had in the Cold War. And it'll actually be a stabilizing factor if Iran gets the bomb. Believe me, there are actually people in Washington who think that. But that's assuming that the Iranian regime acts on a rational decision-making basis. And maybe the Iranian regime will act on a different basis. Let's erase Israel with one bomb. And if Israel were to have a second strike capacity, maybe they'll destroy an Iranian city or two. But we will have achieved our great quest of destroying the Jewish state.
And Ben, I just want to go to another point. Some analysts also say that the new security architecture that is being put together across the Middle East is actually making Iran more aggressive because it feels cornered. What would you say to that?
Well, in fact, it's part of the Islamic Republic's foreign and security policy for the past 4 decades. Exporting the revolution, creating these terror groups, proxies, and partners across the region is actually what has brought Sunni Arab powers and the Jewish state together, and deepening those ties, not just culturally, economically, politically, but on the military and intelligence side. Things that happened before, after, and during the Abraham Accords. It's Iran's behavior that has facilitated this thing. It's Iran's behavior, as well as threats to the regional security architecture that brought the U.S. as well as other international partners deeper into the region. So, if the Islamic Republic wants to know why things are the way they are in the region, it needs to look deep into the mirror.
Ambassador.
Yeah, I think back in 2013-14, during the time when we were negotiating secretly with the Obama administration over the future of what became the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, the Americans were always telling us that if Iran was encouraged to join the international community, was incentivized financially, then it would become, quote-unquote, a productive and responsible regional power. So in 2015, they signed the nuclear deal. Iran got tens of billions of dollars in sanctions relief and international contracts, and Iran did not become a responsible regional power. It went on to extend its sphere of influence across Syria. Of course, it was in Lebanon originally, across Iraq, into Yemen, into Gaza. So now we were saying that because there's pressure on Iran, it's expanding its influence. It's expanding its influence when there was no pressure on Iran, when it was being incentivized to actually be peaceful.
Well, they would argue they were complying with the deal until 2018 when Donald Trump withdrew from the deal.
No, actually, they began to violate the deal when Biden was elected, when won. They did not dare violate the deal when President Trump was in the White House. That's when the big violations happened. And immediately they understood that they had an American administration that wanted to cut a deal, go back to the deal, was willing to make concessions. Then they simply raised the ante by violating, and they're still doing that today. And they are completely convinced in Tehran that the United States actually does not have a military option.
Behnam, finally, do the Iranian people still buy this kind of real integral part of the Iranian Revolution about Israel being their ultimate enemy, about Iranians having a duty to destroy Israel? Do the Iranian people still believe in that?
Oh, not at all. In fact, one of the most interesting things to note is that the more and more revolutionary the Islamist regime in Tehran became, the more and more post-revolutionary and the more nationalist the population in Tehran has become. There's been basically protests against the Islamic Republic as long as there's really been an Islamic Republic. So that's about 4 decades now, 43 years now. But really, you've seen the Iranian people every time they're coming out into the streets, particularly post-2017, when there has been peak foreign pressure against the regime. The Iranian people really pushing that nationalism card over the Islamism card, directly invoking the regime's foreign and security policy in their protests, using every available opportunity, whether environmental, social, economic, to make a larger political point that they have a fundamentally different value set, ideology, and interest than the regime in Tehran. And one of the ways they do that is through the slogans like "Not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life for Iran," or "Forget Syria, think about us." And these are views that are set on the street, but really have crescendoed among the Iranian population, urban and rural, rich and poor, young and old.
Ben Taleblu and Ambassador Oren, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you both.